record button and our AI. So have you seen the documents? I've been putting the the um, AI recording, Zoom AI, and the Otter AI from our meetings, in the documents,
Oh, really?
and the video
Um,
too. So
in the what is the name of the site that you've been putting it on?
it's definingempathy.com.
Okay.
Put the link in.
Okay, there it is.
So you'll see it has meetings and then down to 2025. So I've been putting, I can actually do I'll do a screen share. So it's my workspace for this project.
Yeah, that's great.
So this
You're
is
so organized, by the way. I
yeah,
love
you know what I need to do is it's like I'm good at kind of like documenting all this stuff. It's the turning it into a useful document seems to be I kind of get impatient with that, the writing and the structuring and so that's what I got to get better at. So yeah, so anyway, here's the meeting. I just put the video up too, so we got the definition, we got the AI, we got then the Otter AI. I think that's Otter. Has
That's
everything.
incredible. This is so amazing that you can just have this all ready to go.
I know that's the AI is amazing. You put it into Otter. I don't know if you're familiar with Otter, but it does transcripts. Um, and let's see, that's
Yeah, I haven't
Saturday.
used it, but you've told me about it.
Oh
So,
yeah, and it does a transcript. It does a pretty good job, and it also creates a summary. And so I can just see in the future, you just put it into, like AI and uses this as the base. You can just query it, and kind of get reports. So
oh,
it's amazing what it sort of does.
yeah, game changer.
Yeah, for intellectual ideas. So, and then I did put, what is our date today? The 18th. So, you can just have an agenda and I don't have an agenda here. I think we're going to kind of review your slideshow and then map it onto the holistic definition, empathy definition. Is that where we were last time?
Yeah, so we had gotten through let's see. I mean, really just we'd been talking about my definitions slide. Um,
Yeah, we're going through each of the definitions that you had up there, kind of mapping them from
yeah,
other people, right?
yeah, and also I probably need to hop. I'm so sorry about this, but I think I need to hop off at about 10:45
Okay.
today because I've got a few other meetings that I need to get to today, and I have some preparations to do before I get to those meetings.
You
Uh,
also started a Friday meeting, so we had not a
oh,
Friday,
that's right.
Saturday one, Saturday at 9 a.m.
Yeah, I saw that in your email that you sent out. And have you been having people join for that?
Yeah, I had three people in the
Okay,
last one.
so
So
that's great.
I'm kind of ramping up, kind of want to get this as sort of an ongoing project, he's uh, and so, yeah, I see it as sort of a continuing, if we can get more people who are, I mean, like you have the perfect background for this, so if people who are, the other person, Violetta, she joined, she has her PhDs in empathy as well,
Oh, okay. They seem
but
like people I want to meet as well.
yeah, he comes from a phenomenological point of
Mhm.
view, but she's got well, you have kids too, but she's like having the work and doesn't have a lot of time for this. So
Right.
she's not working on her
So,
PhD like you are. Like
well, lucky.
she already has it.
I'll get there. Okay. I'll get there. Okay, well, why don't I share my screen? And
Okay, let me give you a co-host. Okay.
Okay. Let's see. I actually want to move this over here. What are you seeing? Are you still seeing my Canva with the definitions? Oh, you were muted. I didn't hear what you
Oh
said.
yeah, I was seeing your the definitions. Now I see looks like emails.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I moved it to a different screen and I never know what it's going to do. There we go. Okay, so I think at this point it would be helpful to go through the rest of the presentation so
Okay.
we can kind of talk through the philosophical differences in the way that some of these definitions have conceptualized it and the way that you and I have been talking about it. Okay.
I also emailed you a book I just saw,
Oh, yeah.
political. They're talking about group empathy, but had a little bit of a sort of a woke feel to it. Um, where it's more like, oh, empathize. I haven't read the book, so uh,
Yeah, I definitely will want to read that, especially with the political work I'm going to start doing.
yeah.
Yeah, I just pulled that up. Thank you for sending that. Okay, so basically, this slide is just kind of showing that there are different, some people would call them facets of empathy,
Mm-hmm.
but you and I might say that there are different versions of the same, like different things completely, where they're not necessarily all empathy, but other people see them as empathy. So we need to recognize.
Associated words and terms and concepts to
Yeah. And
empathy.
so yes, there might be some overlap, but I don't really see these as really overlapping processes inside the brain. And so I think using the term, well, I guess this next slide, let's see, hang on. That's where I come, like that's where my brain goes with this, is like, what are we
Mm-hmm.
even talking about, right?
Yeah.
We have so many different definitions. And I know I shared this quote with you last week, that when we use the same term to mean different things or different terms to mean the same thing, we end up with a lot of confusion. And so that really seems to be what's happening in the research right now.
It's
Um,
happening everywhere. It's like it seems like it's 80% of the confusion is just everybody's talking about different terms. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And even what Elon Musk said, what was it, last week?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's an interesting different interpretation of it as well. And so, we can get people all up in arms about it because we think that like they are berating something that is
Mm-hmm.
important to us, but they're not.
Yeah.
And so
That's
we can
my
get
mm-hmm.
upset, but we really don't need to get upset about it.
Yeah, I keep for calm about it too. What I try to do is I try to talk to them. I say, "Hey, let's have a conversation about this," and that's where I find the problem is the guy that wrote the book that Elon Musk is referencing, Saad. I
Mm-hmm.
contacted him and said, "Hey, let's have a discussion about it." He said, "No, I don't have time." So that's where I see the problem is when they don't talk to you.
And that I mean that's an empathy deficit right there, and they don't see that as a bad thing. They see themselves as sticking to their values, which is really, I mean, that's the research that I want to do. And I know we've talked about this, is like seeing where that overlaps, is where I can listen to you and I don't have to feel threatened by what you're saying. And really, the empathy circle does a beautiful job of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to bring him in. As I mentioned, with Paul Bloom, he wrote his first article in the New Yorker, and I said, "Oh, I'd like to empathize with you. Let's have an empathy circle." And he said, "Oh, I don't have time." So a lot of these critics kind of just blow it off.
Yeah,
To me, it's the opposite. If you have an argument, you want to discuss it with the best, steel man, kind of arguments, and refine your arguments. So I find it kind of
yeah,
strange.
yeah. I agree with that. I mean, especially if you're wanting to disseminate your ideas broadly, you are going to run up against people who see it differently. And so if you don't understand where you're coming from, then you're going to be alienating a certain portion of the population and they won't even want to listen to what you have to say.
Yeah.
So you run into the same problem that other people are feeling from you, is that you're pushing them away and then they're going to in turn push you away. So then your ideas don't get disseminated as effectively. Oh, I wanted to tell you also, this is a side note, but I was able to meet with Garrett Cardin. He's the researcher, the neuroscientist at BYU that you sent me that information about,
Oh,
the
right.
news
Uh-huh.
article.
Hmm.
Yeah, we're going to start collaborating on some
Cool.
projects.
Hmm.
Yeah, so
You
thanks
have to
for,
remind me what was he said
uh,
something about empathy, right?
yeah, it was
Or
autism uh,
uh-huh.
and art projects. Like, so
Oh, right, right.
they had people look at art and discuss it with each other. And then another phase of it was they had artists take what they learned from qualitative interviews with autistic people and neurotypical people and turn that into art. And then they could discuss it with each other
Hmm.
to be able to see inside of each other's minds more effectively.
Maybe we could do an
So
empathy circle with him sometime.
I think that's a great idea. I think he'd be really interested. Um, I saw a lot of overlap in the way that we view this and the way that we want to push this work forward. So I'm going to be meeting again with him, not until April, but we're going to start meeting regularly to start working on some
Mm,
projects.
nice.
Yeah. So next time I meet with him, actually, I'm going to write this down though. I'm going to email him and see if there would ever be a time that he could join our meeting.
Well, it
And
was the Cambridge. It's the Cambridge that has the Autism Institute. The guy, what's his name, that wrote the Science of
I
Evil or
don't know.
something.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about the autism research, so
Uh-huh. Yeah,
I'm not familiar
he's
with that.
at Cambridge. I had, yeah. And anyway, it overlaps with empathy. That's where the empathy in the eyes test came from.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Actually, was did I talk with you about that last week or did I talk with him about it?
we talked about it.
Okay. Yeah, I just knew that at some point last week I talked with somebody about it. Okay, so I will reach out to him after this meeting and see if he can join us sometime. I don't know what
Hmm.
his schedule will allow, but yeah, he's very interested in continuing these discussions. So I think he would be a great resource.
It was Simon Baron Cohen. That's it. Who did the?
Oh, of course, of course. I knew
Uh-huh.
that. Yes, of course. If I had just put a little more thought into that, I would have been able to arrive there.
Okay.
Okay, so anyway, I put these in here because these are some studies where they have this one. I actually put the wrong one in here. This is let me see if I can find the other article. Just a second. I'm going to find the other article that talks about this. Okay, so it's not the Stasic article. Okay, so it's instead of this one by Stasic, um, the article that I meant to put in there is "Are we really measuring empathy? Proposal for a new measurement framework." Um, and so the reason that I put that in is because what they have found in their research in empathy is that there's a major disconnect between the way researchers define it, like individual researchers who are just putting in an empathy scale. Like maybe it's not their core research topic, but they want to look at the effect of empathy on something else or something else on empathy. And so they choose a random scale that they don't know a lot about. And it turns out that they often will choose a scale that doesn't align with their own definition of empathy,
Mm-hmm.
which is really problematic because then you end up with these results and you end up with even meta analyses and a lot of research that is saying that empathy is this, where it actually is not, they're not even measuring the thing that they think that they're measuring.
Mm-hmm.
So I see that as very problematic. This article here, you can see Paul Bloom was on this article. They did a linguistic analysis of people's social media posts, and they also gave them an empathy measure. I think it was before they did all of this analysis, but they found that people who rated highly on, I think it was the interpersonal reactivity index, um, they ended up using language in their social media posts that was very self-focused. And when I first saw this article, I was really upset. I was like, they must be doing something wrong. What is happening that empathy is being seen as this selfish topic? But now coming to understand more about it, we're again, I this was before I had read Paul Bloom's book. We're talking about a different version of empathy when we're studying it this way versus when we're talking about actually trying to understand the other person's perspective. And so I have some philosophical stuff to talk through with that. Um, this one, I think we talked through that a bit, just
Hmm.
sort of the timeline of the history of like the change in the word. So I know that you're familiar with this because we
Hmm.
talked about it before, and I know you've said that that you have background with understanding that. But basically, what concerns me about Einfühlung is that it's focused on the individual, and she is infusing her ideas and personality into the art, right? So it comes from art appreciation, and it maintains that appreciation depends on the viewer's ability to project his personality into the viewed object. And so we somehow have taken that term into the way that psychology views empathy. But the problem with that is we're talking about projecting your personality into an object. And so it takes out the subjective nature of the other person. I
Hmm.
see that as really problematic.
Yeah, so in an empathy circle would be instead of listening to what the person is saying, you're saying, well, you are this, you are that. I'm feeling that you're doing this. So you're kind of projecting your feeling of the other person in onto them versus just listening and sort of sensing into what
Yeah. And so
they're
I actually
expressing.
wanted to ask you about that because you use the term sensing into,
Hmm.
which is similar to feeling into. I want to understand from you how it is you use that term and what that means to you.
Hmm. Yeah, the well, I would say it's like the I'm feeling into. So uh, as I sit and look at you, I can see your concentration. So I'm feeling your concentration, maybe your curiosity, uh, maybe a seriousness, a feeling of seriousness, and then I can check is this accurate? That's what the active listening is. It's sort of a check that helps refine that process. So it's me sensing into you as who you are, and it's a whole body experience. It's not just what you're thinking, but your the wholeness, your feelings, your emotions, your thoughts, kind of the wholeness of who you are, sensing into that. So that's the and like and with Rogers, like his definition of I'm accompanying you on your journey, right? It's
Mhm.
you have this emotional journey from moment to moment. Your thoughts, your feelings are moving, shifting. Every second, even when I say something to you, it stimulates some feeling change in you, or when you say something, so you're always changing. And the empathy, the feeling into is I'm feeling along with you, and sensing is broader than just feeling. It's for me, it's the kind of the fullness of who you are, and that you're changing from moment to moment. And
Yeah, I
so,
agree
yeah.
with you that sensing is maybe a better term for it because sensing includes listening and watching, but then also emotions along
Yeah.
with it. Because if we stick with just emotions, it's like we're imbuing the other person with the emotions that we think they should have. Right. And so that can be problematic if that's the only version of it that we're trying to say that empathy is, because that still it puts us back into that place where in that article they're seeing it as a very self-focused practice.
Hmm.
Um, and
So
actually,
is that article is seeing it as sort of like projection, or
yeah,
Hmm.
Yeah. And so it's also, they, the way they see it is you don't really have clear boundaries of self and other. And so you take on other people's distress and you make it your own. And so when
Hmm.
you talk about it, like in your social media posts, you end up saying, "Oh, I'm feeling all of these things. I feel so sad about what's happening in Gaza or whatever." And
Hmm.
it still is about you.
Yeah.
And so from this perspective, with all of these, with Einfuhling being part of it, with Freud being part of it, very focused on almost obsessing about the self, then it inflates the self and it really diminishes the other person, which
Yeah,
I
so maybe
think
we can
that's really
say with the
problematic.
empathy circle is as it depends. There's the role of, just to you have the listener. If that self is the listener and the other is the speaker, the self would be listening to the other side, right, to the other, um, and sensing into their experience, and then you sort of shift. So all the stuff that's coming up for the self, we want to give that space too, right? It's like all those
Yeah.
things you're talking about. You want a space that's all relevant stuff, and that's where the speaker and listener kind of shifting
Hmm.
happens. I did, I did want to. I was about to say that the self is smaller, but in a sense, it's not because I see the quality of empathy as a quality of oneself too. It's a value that I have, so I don't feel diminished. My sense of self is not diminished when I empathize with the
Right.
other because I'm just bringing forward a quality of myself to the other. So I don't feel like it's like the self is a little tiny thing and the other is big. I feel that myself is sort of an empathic self that's pretty big, but it's able to take in and sense into to the other,
Yeah,
if
and
that
that's
makes
because
sense.
you're really good at this, and I think that's why you see it that way. I think that at this, I also want to point out that I'm not putting this slide forward as the way that I think that empathy should be or that it should
Right.
be viewed. It's just that this ends up showing up a lot in the psychological literature.
Hmm.
That even when we talk about others, like in, I think I may have mentioned this, so I'm sorry if this is redundant, but when we talk about the other, even in like social psychology textbooks, you won't ever find a chapter called other or other people or anything like that. It's all about the self, even in social psychology. So it's
Hmm.
all about how other people affect me or even the implied presence of other people. So if I'm thinking about other people, how does it affect me? And so when we're very egocentric in our empathy, then we end up with this problem of thinking that empathy is inside me. And if I get really good at it, some people might say let's shift, and it becomes I should diminish myself and inflate the other person, like you were
Hmm.
saying. It shouldn't be that either. I don't think that this is a healthy model, and I don't think that if I don't have a slide of this, but there are people who see it as the self is
Yeah.
very small and the other is
Right.
huge.
It's like you're giving up yourself and you're doing everything for the other person. So it's better this self-sacrifice that you're doing for the other. They see that
Yeah,
as
which is
empathy.
that's very problematic.
Yeah.
That's not healthy long term. It's I don't even know if I would call it empathy. I would
Hmm.
call it not having a clear sense of
Yeah.
self, which I think is an important part of this discussion as
Yeah. I don't know what's that called. Do we just kind of give up self-sacrifice or something? Yeah.
well. In
I don't know.
psychology, they call it unmitigated communion,
Uh-huh.
which I really like that term because communion, I see that as a very positive word, but when it's unmitigated communion, it's just giving and giving and giving and
Hmm.
giving. And the way that they study it is really more in terms of actions of compassion. And so nobody's really looking at it from the perspective of empathy right now. But I mean, that's something I would like to dig more into is like unmitigated empathy.
Mm. Well, I don't
Um,
know if I told you the story, but my sister-in-law is bipolar. So she went into a sort of a manic phase, and So I said, well, I'm willing to just listen to you, because you're needing support. So it's kind of like emergency empathy, right?
Mm,
So like a therapist is giving emergency empathy to someone who is in distress. They need kind of focused empathy just on themselves. And I listened to her for like 2.5 hours, just active listening. And
mm.
she went through a whole roller coaster of feelings. Part of it was like totally attacking, criticizing me, but I just reflected it back. You think I'm an asshole, you blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of it, I said, okay, well, that was now, will you listen to me, for the mutuality? And she said, no, I'm not going to listen to you. And I said, well, then our relationship is over. And
Hmm.
now our relationship is basically over, except unless we do an empathy circle. Because
Wow.
the empathy circle, I'm saying that I don't want a relationship where I'm just like listening to you all the time.
Yeah.
And it's got to be mutual. So we've held two empathy circles, recently, and so
And
she
how has
has to
that gone?
listen. It's been okay. She's kind of in a better state than she was when she was in. I think she'd gotten off her meds and stuff like that,
Mhm.
and you get in, you get into a just a kind of a growing manic phase. So it was okay. It's like I don't want to relate to her outside of an empathy circle because I don't trust her,
Hmm.
So, but I do want to have an open door. I'm open to an empathic relationship, a mutually empathic relationship. So it's that empathic space between us that's sort of based on mutuality. And I'm actually with the same thing with my brother. So the way he kind of screwed me over with the empathy center in Santa Barbara, kind of behind my
Crazy.
back, kind
That's
of
crazy.
just got another group in there. Even while we're talking, we're meeting, and I'm reporting on stuff we're doing. He knows behind his mind that he's going to get this other group that's a evangelical conservative group that's going to manage and then just tells me this is what we're doing instead of like an empathic relationship would have been, oh, this is something I'm thinking about. What do you think about this? Let's have a discussion. So there's an openness and a transparency needed. Though in the same way, I said, okay, well, our relationship is over. I'm only willing to speak to you in an empathy circle in a situation that's mutually empathic because I don't need a relationship that's sort of like me self-sacrificing and but I'm willing to keep the door open for a mutually empathic relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such an interesting real world couple of real world examples of how negative that can be when it's one-sided. I'm sorry
Yeah.
you have to go through that.
Yeah. It's life.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, and it's true. It is because we haven't been able to create a cultural shift toward
Hmm.
seeing empathy as something that happens between. Let's see.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hop ahead because I've only got about 10 minutes, 12 minutes. Um, so this is the graphic that
Oh
I
yeah. Hmm.
speaks to what you and I are both talking about,
Hmm.
right? Where it's a problem when it's unidirectional. I quoted you here. Uh, but it's not a problem with empathy, but a lack of empathy from the other person. So when people complain about it, that's what they're complaining about.
Hmm.
So I want to talk a little bit about these philosophers. Are you familiar with Buber in
Of
this area?
course. Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
So I would love to have a discussion about like because I'm kind of new to the philosophy side of this, and so I would love to understand more of what you know about how we can apply what they've said to our understanding of empathy. Um, so this is kind of in response to that the fact that psychology is very self-focused and really diminishes the other. And so if we bring these philosophers into the conversation, we see that humans are more than just objects among other objects, right? Like there's a sentience, there's something different about humans. And we have to recognize that art is art. And so Einfühlung is we can't directly apply that philosophy to empathy, right? Like we have to understand that humans have uh their basically infinite and unknowable. That's something that Levinas would, yeah, ungraspable and infinite is the terminology that he uses for it. So there's because the human potential is limitless. And so if we put people into a box of this is how you feel, and we're telling them, or we're even thinking that without saying it out loud, then we're putting them into a finite box. But Levinas would tell us that that is just, it's a completely flawed way of looking at it. And Boss here, he says that people are more than just our subjective representations of them. And I especially like Buber bringing up the other to the level of like a sanctified relationship, I thou
Hmm. Yeah.
versus I it. And so it's really just trying to debunk all of this idea that it's all about empathy happens inside me and I am everything
Hmm.
and the other is just a piece of artwork, right? So what are your thoughts on that, on their philosophies?
Yeah, with I thought that, Rogers and Buber had a conversation, did a recorded conversation. I think there's actually a book transcript
Hmm.
of it. And one part that I found of interest is he said, "You're never going to come to an I-thou relationship in therapy because there's a
Yeah,
therapist-client relationship, which is a different, there's a it's not an equal relationship, and that's a bit what I'm seeing. And the empathy circle is an equal relationship,
yeah,
right? It's not, so it is more capable of an I thou, mutually empathic, deeper connection, re equal relationship. That um so that's one thought there. The object, I think your friend who we had in the group here, he was interested in that, uh, the object, and right, it wasn't your friend, the
um
guy, he had like, he was interested in the relationship versus, I mean, more seeing the humanity of people or so versus
who have
an
I had
it.
join us? I've had Lee join us a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, there was somebody before that.
Can't even think of who that was. Apparently, I'd compartmentalized my memory to not
Hmm.
include that.
So anyway, just the
Why?
object. I would like, I'm not clear on the object, seeing people as objects per se. Like in an empathy circle, what would that look like or feel like? You know, is
So
what.
I think that would be going back to what you're saying, like rather than being present with the person and like trying to see how they're feeling about it, really listening to what they're saying, you shut them down and you're not listening and you label and you say you are a bad person. So that kind of just that makes them an object because that doesn't give them the opportunity to choose for themselves if they are a good person, if
Hmm.
you have already determined that for them. Obviously, if you were to take a step back and really look at it philosophically, you know that they are the subject of their, like they're the author of their own story, like we know that. But then when it comes to interpersonal like conflict, we tend to shut that off and we tend to not give people the opportunity to be the hero in their own story
Hmm.
because
Is
they're
that?
just
Hmm.
go ahead.
Is that like if we have a liberal and a conservative, or a Democrat, Republican, come into the empathy circle, and the liberal sees the conservative as just this racist, all these stereotypes. They just
Mm-hmm.
see the stereotypes, and vice versa. Oh, it's a
Mm-hmm.
libtard, and they're just, woke. And so they both see each other as just all these stereotypes versus sort of taking the time to sense into each other's experience and see the deeper, underlying feelings and needs and humanity of each other. So that's one sort of surface level where it's just based on judgments. There's the other, which is, what can this person do for me? How
Yeah.
can they help me or not? And if they can't help me move myself, get more power or whatever, more money forward, then I don't need to relate to them. So I'm a little, the object part is, I'm still trying to nail it down to the point where I can really feel
Mm.
it within the context of an empathy circle.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. I guess a context that it makes more sense to me. I was just talking with my research team last week about this because we're doing work on sports, like character development in sports. And if we were to look at the other person as an object within the sporting context, it would be this person is my opponent. So, they're on the other team and they are either going to facilitate my ability to aggrandize myself because I'm going to win this game at their expense, or they're going to stand in my way of reaching my goals. And so I would see it as like a big boulder, in the path. Oh, you're so nice. Thank you. So they, again, with either of those approaches to it, they either facilitate my self-aggrandizement because I can use them, or they're standing in my way. And so that objectifies the other person. And so anytime with any relationship, we can use people or we can work with people, viewing them as having the same level of humanity as we have, and recognizing that they are ungraspable. We'll never fully understand them because they are too amazing for us to fully understand.
Well,
I think,
everyone changes from moment to moment, right?
yeah,
Too.
that's where
So,
this ungraspableness comes
mhm.
in, right? Like we really can't even really know what to expect. We can, and that, I mean, the whole field of psychology is trying to make predictions, right? We're trying to understand patterns so that we can predict what's going to happen in the future. But then we fall into the trap of stereotyping people. I mean, even with that, the political research I've been doing recently, there's a political profile, and I know I've mentioned this to you, a political profile of a conservative person. And I look at that and I say, I don't want to have anything to do with that kind of person. But if I take a step back from the research and look at the people that I know who self-define as conservative, I love those people because I have a relationship with them. So it
Mhm.
really is, I think a lot of psychological research can tend to do that as well, where we objectify people and turn them into just a series of numbers, which is really not helpful for our full understanding of the human experience. Anyway, so just to, I'm going to try and get through to the end of this before we have to hop off, just so we can have like the full picture of what the presentation says. And then next week we can have more discussion about it. Is that
Okay.
okay?
Hmm.
Okay. So I talked about you guys and your work here, where we're bringing people across this political and personal divide. And actually, at the end of this presentation, did I tell you this, that I actually facilitated an empathy circle
Mm-mm.
with the group.
Oh,
And
when was that?
this was like a month and a half ago,
Mm-hmm.
sometime
Oh, nice.
like early February, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And people really appreciated it. It was a little clunky at first, and I know you've talked about this, that it's once you get into the rhythm of it, it feels a lot more like you can, your place and how
Mm-hmm.
to interact in the empathy circle. And so once we got past that first couple of rounds through, people really enjoyed it. And then I've shared this with you as well, my analogy of lifting off, right? Going on a hot air balloon ride, you have to communicate back with your ground crew. And then you have to make sure that you ground yourself as well. And sometimes that requires help. Like they have these people actually helping pull the balloon back down to the ground. And so I think that that's an important part of the empathy process, and understanding your own sense of self, your own emotional experience, like in relation to the other person's emotional experience. If we're looking at it from an emotional perspective, it can be, okay, like we were feeling really like worked up during that encounter, but now that I've stepped back from the encounter, how do I feel about this? And so then you can like have self empathy as well, I think is an important part of it. If we're looking at it from the perspective of, well, perspective taking, grounding yourself means that you have like a little bit of reflection time where you think about what the other person has shared with you. Like if they share something that really debunks something that you hold very close to you, like a conspiracy theory, for example. So if you subscribe to conspiracy theories, somebody shares some information with you that debunks that conspiracy that you really think is true, that theory that you think is true. Um, if you were to be healthy in the way that you approach this empathy and perspective taking, you would take the time to think through what they said and compare it with what you believe. And then maybe you would change. And if you feel like what they have shared is not true, or if it's not healthy information that they've shared with you, then you can choose to stick with what you believe as well. But I think that if you don't do this, that's where you end up in that unmitigated form of empathy or unmitigated communion where you're giving and giving and giving, um,
Hmm.
and not taking care of your own needs. So my outstanding questions that I have that I want to dig into this throughout my career is if there's a higher level of empathy that allows the empathizer to maintain convictions to values. I know we've talked about that. And I'm also really interested in this. I don't know if I'll be able to get to this during my PhD program, but maybe later. Is there a form of empathy that respects the perspective of the other person, but then also sees their potential? Because if you, let's say you're a parent and you see where your child can be, if you just get caught up in where they see how they see the world right now, you're not helping them to reach their potential. And so I don't know, I don't really see that coming up much in the empathy research right now.
Maybe we can pick up on this slide next time, like to go into a little depth of
Yeah,
it.
because I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Hmm. And I also put in a link. I don't know if you know Peter Sear, just because you're talking about sports, he did something called empathic leadership in sports.
Yeah,
So I put the link in.
thank
Uh,
you. Yeah, I haven't seen his work.
since you were talking about sports, it just reminded me of his work on empathy. He has a book out on it.
Empathic leadership, lessons from elite sport. I don't know why I haven't encountered his work yet
Mhm.
because there's so much overlap with the work that we're doing. Huh.
Hmm.
Thank
Oh,
you.
okay. Well, good. Then we shall reconvene next week and pick up on that slide and discuss.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Have a good
likewise.
week.